take a few minutes and visit our website at the battleofgettysburgpodcast.com to shop, buy some new merch, check in on our upcoming events, and of course, buy Civil War books from one of your favorite podcasters.
Welcome, everyone, to the Battle of Gettysburg podcast on YouTube. I am your co host, Jim Hessler, and once again, I am joined by my co host, Jody Wilson. Jody, how are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing well, doing well.
We're going to have our friend Wayne Motts come on in a few minutes as our guest co-host for this installment. We're going to talk about the U.S. regulars in the Wheatfield. But, Jody, I thought before we got there, maybe you and I could just banter for a few minutes, do a little what Eric and I used to call housekeeping, and just sort of catch up on feedback from the listeners and upcoming events and so
Housekeeping.
on. Yeah, I thought actually it could be a new feature. We could call it Miss Wilmerding's Housekeeping Report.
I,
Right?
I like that.
Right. Miss Wilmerding, the mysterious and sometimes sketchy housekeeper of Dan Sickles. That could be a new feature here.
Yeah, we're already starting with a Sickles report, so there you go.
Well, we kind of had this heel turn that required us to sort of make a format change here, so we might as well
Yeah,
come out of the gate swinging. I'm thinking, well,
yeah,
we
no.
did have, the numbers have been good for the Bailey episode that we did on Meade's Councils of War, and again, had good feedback from listeners on that. They like you. They like you. I'm the same old co-host. I was here before, but you're new, and
I've been around. I just, no.
and frankly, you've only been on the podcast now for like 2.5 years, right?
Only 2.5 years.
Yeah. Everybody's like,
Okay.
well, like what? Welcome, Jody. Like, for Christ's sake, were you not paying attention? She's already been here.
I don't know what's worse when somebody's like, "Oh, I didn't notice you there."
Yeah,
Maybe I need to
trust
be a
me.
little bit more flashy or flamboyant. I'll
No,
work
no,
on that.
you're plenty flashy. Believe me, I see the user comments. You're doing fine. You're doing
I
fine.
don't know. Speaking of flashy, we have some
Yeah.
news.
Yeah. Would you want to do the upcoming event? Yeah, I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the fourth year that we have co-partnered with our friends
Hmm.
at Seminary Ridge Museum?
Yes.
That date is going to be Saturday, February 28th, 2026. Jody, what are our topics going to be this year? Do we know yet?
I know what my topic is.
Well, what are you going to do?
Uh, well, I think I'd be more, people are going to want to know what your topic is.
Oh, well, why don't we tell them that the overarching topic is going to be controversies at Gettysburg.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a topic. I have a title and everything.
So, but
Get an early start.
you're being coy. Do you want to? I'm sensing you want to hold off on announcing it, which is
No,
okay.
no, no. I'm looking into and I know like everybody nowadays wants to say I'm reimagining. I'm not reimagining anything, but I'm looking at I don't know, that always makes me laugh. But I'm looking at a controversy
Okay.
that is attributed to Little Round Top.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay.
Taking a
Mhm.
little deep dive into Chamberlain and some things that happen after the war.
It's been a while since we've done
Hmm.
Little Round Top on the podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've done anything since we had Gary on in season one to do the myths of Little Round Top Man. But
Yeah.
so this could be something new and exciting. And ladies and gentlemen, this will be Jody's hot take on Little Round Top. Like, how could you possibly not want to show up for that? All right. Well, would you like to know what I'm doing?
Hmm. Hmm. Does it start with an S and end with an S?
Well, it does. Thank you for asking. Yeah, as I kind of debated, do I want to tackle Sickles again? But how do you do controversies at Gettysburg? Now, most people call it the Meade-Sickles controversy. I prefer to call it the Sickles Mead controversy. So again, I'm going to be doing my hot take on that, which I want to be, all humor and sarcasm aside. I want to be perfectly honest. I think my take on it is different than a lot of the traditional versions you get. It's always, oh, Mead was the victim and all of that
Right.
stuff. My take on that controversy is more nuanced, shall we say, as we like
So
to
you're
say on the battle.
revisiting it.
All right. Well, we probably don't want to give too much more away. And actually, I lied. Let's give everything away because registration for the Winter Symposium is now open. And you want to register for this event, you can attend live or virtual. You want to go to www.seminaryridgemuseum.org. That's seminaryridgemuseum.org. Go to their events page and you will see the registration sign up for our February 28th, 2026 Winter Symposium. Hope to see you there. Jim, Jody, Judy Morley, Cody Aish, and our good friend Stuart Dempsey coming back. That is going to be five power packed, hard hitting, controversial speakers. As in past years, we'll have live attendance, we'll have virtual attendance.
Hmm.
More details forthcoming. Follow us on social media. Follow our friends at Seminary Ridge Museum on social media,
I think it's a
and
blast.
it'll
You've got
happen.
five speakers with completely different styles and
Mhm.
interests.
Yeah, and
If you think
lunch,
about it.
and you get fed.
I mean, with the price of groceries, why not? Just
I
go
know,
get a free
right?
meal.
Oh, that's a good
Right.
point. That's a good point. If anybody complains about the price, it'd be like the
Right.
price of lunch.
Yeah.
Maybe a big lunch, but still, the
And
price of lunch. So,
breakfast.
oh,
They
that's
serve
right.
breakfast too.
They do serve so two meals. We're feeding you twice,
Yes.
people, twice. Twice.
Yeah.
And, much of the proceeds goes to the Seminary Ridge Museum. So as always, we're giving back to our community. And doesn't that feel good?
Yeah. It feels great.
All right. So we're before we transition over to the guest, anything else you wanted to talk about?
Let's see.
Ooh, I got one if you can't think of anything.
I know. What do you have?
Well, I've been talking about, upgrading our studios, as the YouTube numbers are getting bigger in that, moving to new headquarters at One Dan Sickles Drive here in Gettysburg. What do you think of my new office here?
Oh, I
I mean,
like it. In honor of Sickles, it almost looks like a law firm in the
oh, I
background.
like that. Hessler and Sickles Esquire. What do you think?
Absolutely, it
Mhm.
does. I love it.
Yeah, very distinguished. I feel like there should be a
Mhm.
receptionist out here, letting our guests in before we
Yes.
talk to them. Yeah,
Saying, they'll see you now.
Mr. Hessler, we'll see you now,
That's right. Absolutely.
Look, I mean, as some people know, before I did this, I spent 30 years in the gut-wrenching, soul-crushing world of corporate finance. This does kind of, by the way, if anybody's watching from those days, hey, good to see you. But no, it does sort of remind me of those days, and maybe not in a good way
Yeah.
either. All right, right.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know
I
either.
feel like the whole battlefield is our studio.
But our point is, we're going back to the Wheatfield tonight in a
Yep.
studio format
Mhm.
with our good friend Wayne Motts. Wayne is going to come on and talk about the U.S. regulars and specifically their action in the last phase of the Wheatfield in and around the Valley of Death. So, folks, we're back in the
Yep.
Wheatfield tonight, and we're doing it because we know how popular the Wheatfield series has been.
And I'm excited for this because honestly, a lot of times people are so tired by the time they get to the last wave.
Yeah,
Not you, but I've been out there before. And by the time you get to the last wave, it's like, oh, and then the US regulars sweep the field, or the US regulars come in, and then they like go on to the rest of what's going on.
should reception
Yeah,
call Wayne in right now?
yeah, we should show him in.
Mr. Hessler and Ms. Wilson, we'll see you now, Mr. Motts. Should we go ahead and do that?
I like that. I like
All right.
that.
We'll sign off with our first installment of the Miss Wilmerding housekeeping report. Folks, did you like Miss Wilmerding's housekeeping? Sound off in the comments. Isn't that what we're
I say
supposed
we
to tell
keep
people
her.
to do? All right, we'll keep her around. We
We'll
know
keep
Dan
her
kept
around.
we know Dan kept her around.
Yes, he did.
So with this, let's bring in Wayne Motts. All right, Wayne Motts, welcome back to the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. How are you?
Hi, Jim. How are you? Hi, Jody. How are you?
Hi.
Living the dream, Wayne. Living the dream, aren't we all here in beautiful Gettysburg?
Where else we get to talk about Civil War all the time,
I know,
Every day,
right?
which is
all day.
which is what we're doing. I
Yeah.
just thank you and Jody very much for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Good, good. Well, just for the record here, this is your third appearance that I can think of on the Battle of Gettysburg
Yeah.
podcast. Way back in the early days, you did one on Armstead.
Mhm.
And then you came back probably now, maybe, I don't know, 2 years ago. You and I did one for YouTube specifically on Pickett's Charge. And that was when
Yeah.
our book that we co-authored together when Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg had been re-released after kind of a long delay. So this is now your third appearance. Wayne Motts, does he need an introduction? Look, you would be on the Mount Rushmore of living Gettysburg historians. How long you been a licensed battlefield guide? Like what, 3 decades now?
38 years. Yeah.
38 years, going on
30.
4 decades.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm getting there. I just want to get to 50. My daughter said, "What do you want?" I said, "I just want to be a guide 50 years. I just want to say I can make it to that
I know
joke."
only,
That's all. That's not a very ambitious goal, but it's a goal
well,
I'd sure like to have.
well, I don't know about you, but the way I'm feeling physically these days, the idea of still being out there in 12 years actually does feel
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
ambitious.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, what are you doing today? You're the CEO again of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg.
I am, and I'm very grateful to be returned there, continuing the good work that I've done. I've been the head of three organizations, as you know. I've enjoyed my time at each one of them. And I've just been very fortunate, very blessed to be able to work in the things that I'm interested in the field that I like, and then pursue some of these side projects, which I get sidetracked on all the time, and you
Yeah.
know that because you've known me many years, and Jody knows me too. I get sidetracked on these things that I love to just research. This what we're going to talk about tonight has deep personal meaning for me, and I've been working on it for many, many years. And so I really appreciate you having me on talking about that.
Yeah, well, let's dive right into it. When people hear my name, they think, oh, Sickles and Custer. When they hear your name, they think Pickett's Charge. But
Yeah,
obviously you and I know this because as you said, we've been friends for years. But for the
yeah,
audience, what got you so interested in the US regulars? Because that's not something people think of necessarily when they think of Wayne Motts.
yeah. And I think first of all, it's easy to think of you doing just sickles, like you mentioned, or something like that. And what you know is so much broader. What you're interested in is so much broader. What you worked on is so much broader. What you published on is broader. And so I sometimes you get typecast in
Right.
these. And I think people think that I know Pickett's Charge or I know Gettysburg, and that's it. I'm interested in a lot of things. This project has, or this topic has particular interest to me for a couple reasons. Number one, I have a relative in the United States regulars in the Civil War, and he was an officer in the 7th United States Infantry Regiment. He was not in the Battle of Gettysburg. He got a commission from civilian life, and he stayed in the military from 1861, to 1886, 25 years. And he was an officer in the 7th U.S. Infantry. And then in the 24th United States Infantry Regiment, he was a white officer of the Buffalo Soldiers, of the
Mm.
black unit. So I've
Oh, wow.
long had interest in that. And then another reason I've had deep interest in it is a mutual colleague of yours and mine, a longtime friend of mine, battlefield guide, the late Michael Phipps. Mike was in three regular Army units. All three of those units that he belonged to in the 20th century and 21st century were here at Gettysburg. He died of a stroke in 2020, and he and I have been friends. We took the guide test together, had many interest in regular Army troops. And one of the things that interested me is he asked me to go out and be with him when he did a tour for PCN, which is probably somewhere in the PCN archives. It's over 30 some years old now, but a tour on the U.S. regulars. And he asked me to go out and hold up things for him. And he was a guide and I was a guide. And I was grateful to do that. He knew so much about it. had studied it for many years. And so that really piqued my interest too. And those two reasons, one of our colleagues, a close personal friend, and my own relative in the
Oh,
war.
so I knew about your relative. I don't think I realized the Phipps connection. I don't think I knew that, or if you had told me that, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, he served in the 17th U.S. He was in the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, and he was in the 5th United States Cavalry Regiment
Oh.
in his military service. And all three of those units were at Gettysburg.
Hmm, okay. Well, let's talk about who was at Gettysburg. When you think of the U.S. regulars, something in the neighborhood of over 6,000 of them at
Mhm.
Gettysburg. But of course, we tend to not really talk about them. We talk
And
about
weren't
the
they
indiv
like the third largest group at Gettysburg, maybe? And we don't really
They're
talk
big.
about them.
They are when it comes to total numbers behind
Hmm.
New York and Pennsylvania for the numbers of soldiers. So yes, I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't mean to interrupt you
Oh,
answering
no.
Jody's question.
Yeah, no, no, no.
We both
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, well, yeah, you guys both did. And everybody says I interrupt, but that's okay. No, but that's right. But no, but both of you sort of finished my thought for me.
Yeah,
It's a huge
yeah,
number. It's if it were a state, it would be one of the most heavily represented states, but we
right,
never talk about them.
right,
So, kind
right.
of a two-part question here. One, why do you think we never talk about them? Comparably to how they should be represented. But then the second part of that would be when we get people here on tours and you try to
Yeah.
explain to them the difference between the regular army and the state level volunteers. I have my way of explaining it, but this is your chair. I'm curious, how do you explain that to people?
Okay, so let's take the first one first. So you mentioned the numbers, and we're only talking about U.S. regular troops in regular units. So
Mhm.
the listeners and viewers should understand that John Fulton Reynolds is still a soldier in the U.S. Regular Army. He holds a commission as the colonel of the 5th United States Infantry the day he's killed at Gettysburg, but he's in a volunteer position at Gettysburg. So
Hmm.
many of these men that are in high-ranking positions in the Battle of Gettysburg in the Union Army are holding a commission in the Regular Army, but they're not fighting with the Regular Army or they're not serving with them in the Battle of Gettysburg. So first of all, let's define that, Jim. It's the
Mhm.
infantry and the artillery and the cavalry. We've got members of the engineers. There are also doctors. The regular army had no chaplains at Gettysburg, although they were authorized to actually have them. But one of the reasons why we don't talk about them, I think, first of all, let's look at the monuments to the regulars on the battlefield. If you're a volunteer soldier in the Battle of Gettysburg, the first regimental monument is put up in what, 1879 for these regiments. And in the 1880s and 1890s, there's a tremendous amount of monuments put up to volunteer Union regiments that fought at Gettysburg. If you are a regular, you don't get that. You don't have any government tablets on this battlefield until after the turn of the century. So you're looking at 25 years after
Hmm.
all the volunteers have units, and you do get a very large monument, which most people don't realize what it is when they drive up Hancock Avenue and they see the U.S. Regular Memorial there. But that wasn't dedicated until 1909. So 45 years basically after the Battle of Gettysburg, these men in the regulars are getting some recognition, and many of them are gone because there's just simply a small percentage of them. You mentioned six to maybe 7,100, depending on what numbers you count. And if you look at how many of them served in the whole military in the Civil War, the whole Union Army in the Civil War, it's 2 million soldiers in the Union Army in the Civil War. Only about 67,000 are in the regulars. 3.4%, roughly 3%, very small. So we don't hear about them. One, because I think they have late monuments. Two, they are not around. And, we also have to think about what happens to these men. The men who go or that are in volunteer units after the war, many of them become congressmen,
Mhm.
senators. So a lot of these regular army soldiers stay regular army soldiers, and we can talk a little bit about that. Or they go out, but they don't. Some of them they don't get up into where some of the volunteers are. So I would say that's a good reason why we don't hear about them. When explaining to them, it's pretty simple. They for several for most of the units at Gettysburg, not all in the U.S. Regular Army, they were around before the war and they're around after the war. And for one set of group that fought here, they were created for the war and they're after the war. You're in a volunteer unit, you're raised by the state, and then you're sworn into federal service. The officers are elected, and the colonel and the lieutenant colonel and the major are commissioned by the governor. And in the regular army, these officers are commissioned by the president of the United States. They're appointed and commissioned by him with the approval of the Senate. And the Secretary of War has a great deal of recommendation power related to that. So you have to think about who's around before the war, who's around after the war. And most of these units that are volunteer units, they're created for the war only. And that's it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, none of these guys in the U.S. regulars seem to write anything.
That's the other big problem. And finding their manuscripts, a very difficult task because unlike the volunteer units that are recruited in the counties, you go to the county seat, you look at the county historical society, you say, hey, I'd like to find diaries and letters. These regular Army units are generally recruited in the larger, more urban areas. Not always, but generally. So New York City, Boston, up in Maine, for some of them, Connecticut. So it just depends. It's more difficult to find a cache of papers for a regular soldier, not only because there are fewer of them, but because how they're from all over the United States, the northern states.
Also, do you think it's the idea that they were doing their job and then once the war's over, they just continue doing their job? It's not like they're later on and they're, when they get up in years, they're writing these kind of manuscripts about their activity and memories. I feel like it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think, and many of them were foreign. One of my friends who wrote a book on the Irish Brigade said there were more Irish in the regular army than there were in the Irish Brigade.
Oh, interesting.
And he's about right there. There's a heavy German population. There are many foreign soldiers that are in the U.S. regular army in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay.
In all these units, the infantry, the artillery, and the cavalry. So they come from modest backgrounds in most cases, and in many cases they might stay in the army or go on and do regular jobs like you say. So it's interesting to see the difference. Some of them are farmers, no question about it. But like I said, a lot of them come from urban environments.
Okay, so we're not talking about all the U.S. regulars tonight. As part of our Wheatfield series, we're going to focus specifically on two specific brigades, and they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be in the 5th Corps, 2nd Division under General Romain Ayres, and they will be the brigades of Day and Burbank. So we're talking probably between those two brigades about 2,500 men or so. But as we kind of said a little bit in the introduction, they're going to come into action really at the closing phase of the Wheatfield fight, come splashing across the Valley of Death and
Right.
have a short but spirited fight. Before we go there, do you want to meet the guys a little bit? Just talk a little bit about Ayres, Day, and Burbank, a little bit about their backgrounds and some of the numbers and regiments involved so that people kind of have a little bit of table setting here.
Sure, absolutely, Jim. So, as you mentioned, first of all, there are 11 U.S. infantry units with the Army of the Potomac and the 8th United States Infantry Regiment, which happened to be the regiment that George Pickett belonged to, that James Longstreet belonged to. That regiment is with George Meade at his Army headquarters in Tawnytown, Maryland, and it stays
Oh,
there. So it does not fight on July 2nd. So there are 10 regiments, 5 in the 1st Brigade of the U.S. Regulars and 5 in the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Regulars. And so what we're talking about when we talk about infantry of the regulars fighting in the Wheatfield, we're talking about 10 specific regiments. And the 1st Brigade was under the command, both of them are under the command of regular Army officers, both West Pointers, both of them highly experienced with a lot of longevity as professional soldiers. So the 1st Brigade of the 2nd Division of the 5th Corps, that's what these units are involved in. Let's remember Romain Ayres will step up to command the division when George Sykes steps up to command the Army Corps because George Gordon Meade has been set from the 5th Corps up to the Army of the Potomac.
Right, right.
So the 1st Brigade of the second division, which Romaine Ayres commands at the Battle of Gettysburg, is under the command of a New Englander by the name of Hannibal Day. And Hannibal Day was an 1823 graduate, a classmate of George Sears Green. And that's right, 1823. He's born in 1804. So
Wow.
he's an older guy, and he has a tremendous record. I mean, he's in the Black Hawk War, he's in the Seminole War, he's in the Mexican War. I mean, this is like he's on like war number 4 here. We're talking about, not counting the Indians that he quelled. And right at the beginning of the Civil War, um, I had the pleasure of going out west. Jim and I went out west together, and he was stationed at Fort Abercrombie, North Dakota. That's where he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
at the beginning, then a major, and later Lieutenant Colonel Hannibal Day, the Second United States Infantry Regiment.
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out too, since you're talking about the pre-war service, kind of in re-familiarizing myself with his bio. I didn't realize he had spent time at Old Fort Niagara on the Niagara
Oh yes,
frontier and in
yeah,
Buffalo. So,
yes,
little bit of a
yeah.
connection to
Your
me.
own, yes. If he's all over the place, he's all
Yeah.
over the place. But he's involved in staff duty between the beginning of the war and up to the Battle of Gettysburg. And then he gets orders to go to the Army of Potomac. He has not been in battle with these troops. He's not commanded soldiers on the battlefield. And so this is the first time, because he's the senior officer when Ayres is kicked up to division command. This is the first time that he's going to be on a battlefield in command, basically of anything. Um, save maybe at the company level for his pre-war experience in the skirmishers that he's involved in. So he is at the Battle of Gettysburg, and he will go out of the service shortly thereafter. I made a couple notes just so I wouldn't forget them, Jim. So he dies in 1891,
Mm.
and he lives to be a very, very old man by 1891. The second brigade is under Sidney Burbank, and Burbank was a classmate of Robert E. Lee's. So he's in the class of 1829, and like Day, he's born in 1807, and he's born in Massachusetts. So Day is from up in Vermont, and Burbank is from Massachusetts. Burbank graduates in 1829, and he'll be a soldier for 41 years. He retires in 1870, and comes in and takes over the first brigade before, or I guess the second brigade. Now I get confused. He's in this position for some time, not a long time, but for some time. So he's been in command before, and then he gets basically retired out of service himself there, and he's buried in Cincinnati, Ohio. Dies in 1882 is when he dies.
Yeah, and I just want to put some context around their West Point years, as you've kind
Yeah,
of talked about the class and, these guys getting out of school 40 years before the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, if I'm doing the math right, Hannibal Day is 59 years old at the Battle
that's
of
right.
Gettysburg. Now
Yes.
that one seemed old. I don't know about you now, but that's kind of feeling like the prime of life is where as we get closer to it ourselves.
Yeah,
But
you're right. And one of the other things I want to say is that Sidney Burbank at Gettysburg, his son was a regular Army infantry officer in the 14th U.S. Infantry in the
uh,
Oh,
Wheatfield, Sidney Wayne Burbank, and he was killed at the Wilderness. He was killed in action in the Battle of the Wilderness.
oh,
So Burbank lost his son in the American Civil War as well. So both these men um, have very long military service, and they're regulars themselves. Ayres is a graduate of the 1847 class at West Point, an
yeah.
artillerist by training. He too is a professional soldier,
He's
and so
only
that's why these
he's
soldiers are modeled. Yeah,
Ayres is only 37 years old. I mean,
yes, he's a younger. He is, and when you think about that, when Ayers is born, these guys are already in this. Well, I've already been long in the service
That's
for
exactly
many
right. I
years.
mean, these guys are getting out of West Point 2 years before
Yeah,
their boss is born. And
yeah,
I've said this a million times. If there's
yeah.
one thing older men do not like, they do not like taking orders from younger men. I
Right,
experienced that many times in my career. Now, this
right.
dynamic is kind of new enough. I don't know that they all had time to really do that, but I'm just sort of planting that seed out there to kind of highlight the age gaps a little bit.
So
Yes,
now
and
does
Jim, one of the things that you asked me about too is that these two brigades are with the Army of the Potomac in the Fifth Corps since the Peninsula. So they're commanded by different people, but they're together in Fitzjohn Porter's Fifth Corps from the Peninsula on, basically. Now, after Gettysburg, these groups are going to be just a shell of themselves. And some of these regular units will continue through 1864, but by that time, they're going to be pretty much out of the service. They tend to be smaller. And I should say, unlike the volunteer units at Gettysburg, where all 10 companies of a regiment are usually present, in the regulars, that's not the case. You might have only a few companies of the regiment present, and for what we call the new Army regiments, that's the 11th to the 19th Infantry, these were raised for the war. They created them in battalions. So in some cases, you have the 1st Battalion, you have some companies, and the 2nd Battalion, you have some companies. So it's a little bit different than some of the volunteer soldiers that you might be familiar with fighting on the battlefield. So the units like the Iron Brigade at 24th Michigan has all 10 of its companies at the Battle of Gettysburg. The regulars, they don't have that. Some of them are stationed elsewhere.
so now Day he only meets his men like June 28th, correct? He has
He gets, I'm not exactly sure the exact day. He doesn't get orders to go to the Army of the Potomac till April. So
okay.
I'm not exactly sure what day he shows up. He shows up definitely after the band, and it may be that soon. I'm not exactly sure. I can off the top of my head exactly
You
what
know,
day he gets there, but it's very shortly before the battle.
and
Yeah,
again, that comes back to what we said at the
yeah,
beginning. If you're trying to do a little bio work on these guys, you don't see a lot on
yeah.
them. But you're right,
Right.
Jody. Most of the bios that I see on Day kind of imply he literally comes into the command as
Right.
they're on their way up to Gettysburg, like
And
literally
he
on the
rides into
march.
town and
Yeah,
just
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
heads
Now
on to
let
Gettysburg.
let let's remember that the second U.S. his regiment is in Burbank, but the men of the sister brigade certainly know him. He had been an officer in the Sixth United States Infantry Regiment. There might be some senior men that may have known him, but most of the hierarchy doesn't know him, and most of the men do not know him, only with few exceptions. An old gray-haired guy running around, but I would love to see what the reaction was
Right.
when he rode out there with his, because he's described even before the Civil War as having a head as white as snow. He's described that even before the war. So he looked old. Everybody knew he'd been in the service a long period of time. Old guy riding up on horse right before they're going to going into action be an interesting thing.
Yeah. You couple of thoughts. I'm glad you mentioned the point that really none of these have 10 companies here with them, because
Right.
when you look at the order of battle for these guys, you consistently see that represented. It's 6 companies, 8 companies thing. And because of that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the regiments then at Gettysburg are really commanded in most cases by captains. In one or two cases,
Yeah.
I think there's a major, but it's mostly captains. And again, just not sort of the traditional dynamic that we might be used to when we're thinking of our state level friends.
Yeah, that's right. Major DeLacy Floyd Jones, who commanded the 11th U.S. at Gettysburg, is a classmate of George Pickett's, and he is a major in the regular army, graduated in 1846 because he didn't take a volunteer commission, because he chose to stay in the regulars. Then he's going to pay a promotional price
Right.
for that. And you're right. Most of these regiments are commanded by captains. The 11th has a major, the 14th U.S. Major Grotius Giddings, and the 2nd United States Infantry Regiment. But most are all captains, and that's because the senior officers are all volunteers.
Hmm.
They're all in the
Yeah.
volunteer service
Yeah.
and carried all the roles.
I do want to say the sixth has one of my favorite names, Captain Levi Boots. Do we know
Yeah.
anything about Levi Boots?
Well, Boots was in the 6th United States Infantry Regiment, and he has a fascinating history. He got a commission after the Mexican War, which is very, very rare. Normally, the West Pointers get the commissions, and his class, it's a class barrier difference, but he got a commission prior to the Civil War. And at one time, he will serve on post second in command with Louis Armstead
Mm,
at some places, Jim. So,
okay. I didn't know that.
yeah.
Wow.
So, and he's from Delaware. He's a native of Delaware, and he stays in the regular army and dies there. Oh, there you go. What was Sickles? I like that. So he's got an interesting. And we could tell stories, and you wanted me to mention a couple, and we will. But there's just tremendous amount of stories for these
Mhm.
for these men. Yeah.
Well, let's stick with one story. So still with Day's Brigade, one of the units with Day is the 3rd US. Now
Hmm.
there is a young officer serving in the 3rd US that I wanted to make sure, before we got talking about other things
Yeah.
that we didn't get to. Jody, do you like Hamilton?
I do like Hamilton.
So does my wife. So, but Jody, you
But we're
also
talking about the other Hamilton that's at Gettysburg.
Hmm.
yeah, well, so you and I also serve on the board together, the Little
Hmm.
Bighorn Associates.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
one of the young officers, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, he's a lieutenant at Gettysburg, would be Lewis Hamilton in the 3rd US. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about Lewis
Yeah,
Hamilton?
I got a kick when you asked me about that, Jim, because I immediately thought that you meant George Hamilton of the 10th United States
Yeah.
Infantry. We actually had two Hamiltons in the regular brigade that were officers. So I'm like thinking, Hamilton, which guy? And I should have known it's the one that you would be interested in. But Lewis McLean Hamilton was an officer. He got a commission in the 3rd U.S., but at Gettysburg, he is serving as aide de camp to General Ayres. So he's on the staff of General Ayres in the Battle of Gettysburg. He commanded a company at Fredericksburg, commanded a company at Chancellorsville, and an aide in the Battle of Gettysburg coming down to the 3rd U.S. And when the war ends, he will get a commission and be a captain in the 7th United States Cavalry Regiment. He will die at the Battle of Washita on, Jim, help me, the 27th of November, 1868, I think is the date of that battle and the date of his death. And he is a native New Yorker. He's the grandson of Alexander Hamilton. Hence why you're mentioning it. He has a tremendous pedigree, one of the brightest and really um, singled out as a high performing officer in the Civil War. And you know more about it than I do, but it's my understanding he was like the youngest of his grade in the Army at the time that he was commissioned to full captain
Yeah,
in the
that's my
regular Army
understanding
after
too. Yeah.
after the war.
Well, he
So
was only
he
like 24 when he died, right?
very young guy.
Yeah.
So he is at Gettysburg, and he is mentioned in Ayres' report as a member of the staff. Normally, he would have been with the 3rd Infantry, which is the unit that guards the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This is a unit on active duty today in the United
Hmm.
States Army. Like many of these regiments that we're talking about, there are soldiers in the U.S. Army today that can trace the lineage of their unit serving with it today, far beyond back before the Battle of Gettysburg, but including
Yeah.
the Battle of Gettysburg.
So, as you guys both know, we do a little feature here on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast called the Sickles Report. We also do something called Custer's Corner, which, doesn't quite catch on the way the Sickles Report does. But this would be our edition of Custer's
Hmm.
Corner. So, yeah, to your point, Wayne, when Hamilton was killed at the Battle of the Washita in November of 1868, the irony is he was officer of the day, which normally would have had him staying behind, guarding the supply
Hmm.
wagons and the train and things of that nature. But being the aggressive young officer that he was, he insisted that he wanted to go forward with his troop, and Custer led him. And he was what many people consider to be the first Army casualty of the Battle of the Washita. As you said, only 24 years old when he was killed. So.
Yeah, and Jim, the newspapers, you know far more about it. There's a fact I just learned right there. That's fascinating. It looks like he's buried. It said at Camp Supply, and is Sheridan or one of these. There's a lot Custer's at his at his burial, right? I mean, when he's buried first in Oklahoma, he's buried, and then his body's taken to Poughkeepsie. But he's got the newspaper has all these famous people
Hmm.
there
Yeah,
while he's
yeah,
there. I don't know
yeah.
who else is there, but there's a lot
Well,
of famous.
well, like you
Yeah,
said, he was a big deal. He was a Hamilton, and that was
yeah,
recognized at the time,
yeah,
above and beyond being highly regarded as a bright young officer. So yeah, I think a
yeah.
lot of the members of the Seventh were quite affected by his death, Custer and Sheridan included.
For the viewers and listeners, that you can go to Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery, Poughkeepsie, New York, and you can see Hamilton's grave. He's got his family plot there is extensive.
Yeah, my grandmother was actually from that part of New York State, so I have a little
Wow,
personal connection to Poughkeepsie as
wow.
well. But we won't go into the Poughkeepsie, New York report here. We'll keep things
Okay,
moving back
okay.
to the
Just keep it Custer Corner,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So, all
Yeah.
right. So, how about back to the Wheatfield? Wayne, you mentioned in the introduction, and one of the things we like to do here at the Battle of Gettysburg podcast is clear up confusion in the historiography and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Burbank, you mentioned in the intro, born in 1807, which would make him 55 years old at Gettysburg, which would,
Yeah,
as you said, West Point, make him a contemporary of Robert E. Lee. I have
yeah.
seen some published sources say Burbank is 61 at the Battle of Gettysburg,
Mm.
which then would make him right behind George Green. But that's not accurate, is it? I mean, at 55,
No,
is that what we're going with?
I think his birth date is the year Lee was born.
Yeah,
You even knew the month. So Lee's birthday's in January, but I, Burbank's birthday, I believe, is later in the year. But no, I think it's 1807 is the right. It's
good.
still older, like you said.
Yeah,
Most,
that's my
we got to tell everybody the average lifespan of people back in these days. You could be 40, 45 years old. I mean, these guys are older, very older men, especially to be out campaigning. I
I
can't
was
even
getting ready to say,
imagine.
that's
wow,
it.
he's only 55.
Yeah.
That's so young.
Yeah, well, that's because we're, oh, of course, my age. But I mean, nowadays we don't think anything about it. But when you think about what that is 160 years ago,
Right.
especially to be campaigning, actively
Hmm.
campaigning, that's a big deal.
That's
Hmm.
rugged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now,
Burbank's brigade, Jim, is the one that's in front. So these
right.
units.
Hmm.
These units are going to come from Frederick, Maryland. They're basically going to go over to um, come up from Maryland, go to Union Mills, go over to Hanover, then over to Bonneville, which is what we know today. And then on July 2nd, very early in the morning, they're going to move over to where near where the George Spangler Farm is, basically Blacksmith Shop Road in Baltimore Pike. And that's where they're going to be before they get the call to go over to Little Round Top. And that's somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. Vincent's brigade is already in battle over there when these guys are resting and get called and get moved over there. And they're going to go over then to where Little Round Top is. And Burbank's brigade will be in the front, 5 regiments of infantry in the front of this configuration. Their left will be up near, not too close to the crest, but up near the crest where Weed's brigade will be deployed, the 3rd Brigade in this division of Ayers. And then Day's men are going to be stacked behind where those are. And then they'll wait there for a while before they go down into the Valley of the Death and cross over there.
And so Burbank's got the smaller brigade of the two. He's only got like 950 guys with him, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The units of Burbank are very small, and I'll make sure I get them. That I get them correct here. The Second U.S., the Seventh, the 10th, 11th, and 17th U.S. are the ones that are, and the 10th U.S. only has like 3 companies at Gettysburg,
Yeah,
like
right.
exactly like what we were mentioning earlier. It's a very, very small unit. And by the way, one of the officers in the 10th U.S. is Robert Wells, the son of Gideon Wells, Lincoln's Secretary of the Navy. He is an officer
Oh.
wounded at Gettysburg in the 10th U.S. in the Wheatfield.
Now, Burbank, we probably said it before. Burbank had commanded this brigade at Chancellorsville.
Yeah, he's got it.
So,
He's got it ahead of time. Yes.
so
Yeah.
unlike Day, Burbank has at least had one major battle kind of under his belt already with these guys.
Right,
But
and he's been around. He has what more combat experience at least coming in from the Civil War than what Day has in Civil War related terms.
Burbank, I guess, was suffering from some health issues. He'd been knocked down, I think, twice recently with hepatitis, I read somewhere. So,
Yeah, he always had one of the reasons why he's got to retire. Not only does he have but it's an age. He's got multiple afflictions for for retirement. Yeah, and I think he dies in Newport Barracks, Kentucky. He dies down there, I think, in Kentucky. He's buried Spring Grove Cemetery, I believe.
you're the Ohio cemetery guy. I'll take your
That's
word
where
for it. Yeah.
that's where he is. But uh, anyway, so you're right. He's not in the best of health, and you can see why. Look at all the campaigning this guy's done. It's
Yeah.
40 years as a soldier right
Yeah, it's
there.
crazy.
Yeah,
Well, one of the benefits, folks, of watching us on YouTube is when we do this, I'll probably post pictures of these guys, and again, get an
yeah,
appreciation
yeah.
for how old they are. Not spring chickens like the three of us are, but
You can post Day with his snow white hair, and everybody can see it, even though it's black and white. They'll know what it looks like, Jim.
all right. Well, so Wayne, you already started the setup, so the action is already in play on Little Round Top.
Right.
Meanwhile, what we would consider be the last phase of the Wheatfield is kind of underway. Caldwell's division is getting pushed back by a
Hmm.
renewed assault from Semmes and Wofford, and Kershaw's coming back into the action, and it's just chaos in the Wheatfield at that point.
Right.
So you had sort of lined them up in and around the Valley of Death. We had, as we said, we have Burbank's brigade in front. Day's
Hmm.
brigade behind them. You want to kind of pick up the action from there?
Sure. So these units are right up along where the stone wall is. This is the same stone wall where Benson's brigade and the 20th Maine and Chamberlain were before they deployed up at Little Round Top. So these units, Burbank's men are right in front. They're in a line of battle, and they go from roughly the Wheatfield Road up to a little hill that is just north of where Devil's Den is located. We call it Regular Hill. So they're lined up there. And then they're ordered to swing out and move at a 45-degree angle to move into the wheat field into Rose's Woods. And then the second line, Day's men are stacked, and they don't even get deployed in a line. And Jim, Burbank's men are out in front, and the two regiments that are on the left and the right, the extreme left is the 17th U.S., and
Yeah.
the extreme right is the 2nd U.S., and they're going to get terribly decimated in this movement because they're going to get flanking fire. Others are going to get take heavy casualties, but these two particularly. And then Day's men, some of them are down in that low ground along Crawford Avenue when you drive down to go to Little Round Top today for the viewers and the listeners, and they're caught down in this gully down below where Devil's Den is, below where Rose's Woods are located, and they're getting all kinds of rifle fire. And many of those poor guys are just killed where they are down there without even going forward really and participating in the battle. Day's casualties are less than Burbank, but Day doesn't even get to fight really in the battle. His troops are stacked up, and there he is. And then meanwhile, Ayres's men have gone into the wheat field, and the next thing you know, Wofford's brigade is coming in from after they've attacked the peach orchard and taken it over, bearing down on the flank of where Burbank's command is. And boy, the regulars are not going to be out there for very long. They can't be
Right.
because they're just going to be hit from these multiple directions, and they take some frightful casualties in a very quick amount of period of time. And for some of them, those members of the 2nd Brigade, um, it's just going to be really really bad. I think you got it for Day's brigade. You got to think to yourself, which is the 1st Brigade. Um, you wouldn't think it was that bad, but it is because they're just caught in the crossfire and all this infantry fire that's
Mhm.
down there.
Now,
And
I've read that Burbank's casualties are about 50%, around that.
Yeah, so it depends on, what you want to look at. So Day is about 24 and a half, and I
yeah.
wrote that
Mhm.
down too. And Burbank is, Busey and Martin list him as 40 at 46.9. So it is. It's about half. So
Uh-huh.
the difference between Burbank and Day in the percentage of casualties, Burbank has about double. But what's shocking is that Day has a quarter and his troops aren't even deployed to fight. I mean,
Yeah.
those guys are losing a quarter of their men, and they're really not even out in a line of battle like you and I would think, engaging the enemy.
Mhm.
They're just
Yeah,
a very bad situation.
And we're talking about massive casualties when they're only engaged for what?
Yeah.
20 minutes,
Yeah,
30?
I think 30 minutes would be the outside of that. I think it's got to be less than that. And you're right, it's just a tremendous amount. And it has a lot to do with how the unit is compromised. The right of that line is compromised by Wofford. The left of
Hmm.
that line has Confederate troops right in front of it in the Roses Woods. And then if you're in Day's brigade and you've got those casualties, you got Devil's Den being overrun. So Day's men are being shot from up high on that ridge line too.
Yeah, Day's interesting because I'm going to get nerdy now, but Day's interesting because if you look at all the individual regiments, the casualty rates are all kind of comparable. They're all sort of in that
Right.
24 to 25% neighborhood.
Yes.
Whereas, as we
Yes.
said before, Burbank in the front line, he kind of wheels left. And
Yeah.
did anyone ever really explain why they wheel left? They must be thinking their right is going to connect somehow with Caldwell's guys or other Fifth
Yeah.
Corps troops in the field.
Yeah, they think that they're going to actually like relieve troops that are in there. There's some question as whether they get an order to relieve them or what happens. But then Air Staff Officer and Jim, you know the story. Air Staff Officer turns and said, "Look, I think we're facing, the wrong way." And it's like, "What? We can't be." And
Yeah.
those poor troops are coming down there. So it's a very confusing. I just can't imagine how confusing it was
Mhm.
with that. But these regiments, and in the second regiment in from the left, the 11th U.S., it has the most number of officers killed for the regulars down there for any regiment. Five of its officers are killed or mortally wounded there. So it's just the flanking units seem to take it the most on this.
Again, dark humor, but it's one of my favorite Wheatfield stories. The guy says, General Ayres, you will have to look out for your command. I don't care what anyone says. Those troops in front are running away. Because
Yeah,
Caldwell had said, no, 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 they're
right.
not. And then Caldwell has to kind of
Yeah,
go
yeah,
right off
yeah,
and say
yeah.
his thing too. The
Yeah,
the
and then
other
they're
thing
not
though,
sure. This is one of the reasons why Caldwell in the reorganization goes away, Jim. Caldwell is not well. Hancock doesn't like Caldwell. Caldwell's leadership at Antietam, at Gettysburg. These are not things. So later on in the reduction of the army, Caldwell will not be commanding a division in the
Mhm,
reorganization of the army. So, and
mhm.
I think this episode in the Wheatfield is one of those reasons why.
But the way the story always goes is Caldwell is talking to Ayres. So Ayres is out on the ground with his guys.
Yes.
He's not back on Little Round Top smoking a cigar saying, "Hey, I hope my
Right.
boys get it done out there." But he's on the ground with his guys, and I give him at least credit for that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. They must have been under fire. I don't care who's in
Right.
front of them.
Hmm.
They'd be a big party with a lot of officers around them. There would be, and then they're confused as to where they ought to be facing because Wofford, I think, really throws them off by coming down that road. And next thing you know, the second U.S., which is on the right, is just shot to pieces over there, getting hit from the front and flank when those troops are coming down there.
Mhm. And you mentioned the other point too, with Day being in the back line. Not only does he not really get into the fight, but he can't shoot because he's got Burbank in front of him. So
Yeah,
that's another
yeah.
problem. Yeah. So it's
Day is mentioned. Ayres is complimentary of the brigade commanders. He doesn't. He says they do well, and Day has a horse killed underneath him out there, and mentions that in his little report. So there's no question he's out there. It's just
yeah.
what kind of leadership is, and unfortunately, it's kind of like Howard's 11th Corps troops. They're just in a very very difficult position through no fault of their own, trying to hold a line there that is virtually impossible to be able to do on the second day, given
Well,
the Confederate numbers and the terrain that's there.
even their approach, I would think it would be very hard or difficult to kind of see where they need to go. The
Yeah,
sight
I mean,
lines,
you don't really see when you're sitting up there at that wall and you're in Burbank. You look out.
right?
Now granted, the trees aren't as thick as they are now, but you got smoke, you got everything in front of you.
Hmm.
You're not really seeing anything in front of
No.
you, and you've not been assigned any type of goal or place to go to either.
Right.
So it's in. So my guess is this is probably 6 to 6:30 in the evening. It might be my best guess at it. 4:30 to 5 o'clock, they're going to get over there. 5:30, so you figure 6 to 6:30, somewhere in that range, before the Pennsylvania reserves kind of clean that up right around sunset down there. But that would be my guess as to when a lot of this is going on.
Well, Wayne, you mentioned Day's horse getting killed. I mean, one version of that story is Day has gotten the order to retreat, and he's sort of calmly filling his pipe with tobacco.
Yeah,
He leans down to ask the lieutenant for a match, and while he leans down, the bullet comes through the
yeah,
horse's neck. So
yeah,
again,
yeah,
kind of a dark humor story, but I do like the idea too of the supposed desk jockey Day cool under fire. He's not panicking.
yeah.
He's lighting his pipe and gonna have a smoke while the bullets are flying around him. So
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
that
It's
says.
and in Day's career, given what he went through and the places he commanded, he'd seen a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And I don't know how many Indians he saw at one time, but he was out in the middle of nowhere, with hostile Indian tribes all around him at different places in his career. So kind of makes you wonder, what he saw and what was going through his head over there. But I feel bad for him because I can't imagine what he's thinking about his troops. You got to lose men like that, and you're a commanding officer. If they get to fight back, that's one thing. If you're losing them while they're fighting, that's one thing, because you're going to lose troops while they're out there fighting. But if they're down in this hole and they're behind a whole front line of troops and they're getting shot to pieces and they aren't able to really participate in that, that's got to do something to you. All you want to do is have that front cleared out so your guys can get up there and unleash them. And so going through his head, losing all those troops, I can't imagine as the commander what that was like for him.
Now,
Out
is this
there.
his last battle? Isn't this like his
Yeah,
first and last? Okay.
yeah, it is. It's basically his first and last at this level. Now, keep in mind he'd been
Right.
at these other actions
Right.
before, but I just, I think it's different than we're out shooting the enemy and we're in a line of battle and we know we're going to lose troops in that case. But in this case, your troops are pinned in and you're losing men and you can't fight back. And I just think about what's going through his head. There he's losing a quarter of his men and they haven't really done anything. He can't
Yeah.
get them to
Yeah.
shoot.
Everything's going to hell. They're getting fire on the left, they're getting fire on the right. In
Mm-hmm.
Burbank's front line, that's 17th US, which is on the left. They're taking the fire from Devil's Den. They
Yeah.
actually have the highest casualty rate. QC
Right.
and Martin puts them in at 57.7 for
Yeah.
what's that worth. So again, it's clearly hot and heavy on the left. Anything else you
Mm-hmm.
want to cover here, or should we start retreating back across the Valley of Death?
No, we can start retreating across the Valley of the Death. We should say, and Jim, it doesn't have anything to do with this, but the cavalry regiment that lost the most number of men in the Battle of Gettysburg is at Fairfield for the 6th U.S. It beats the 7th Michigan. It's number one on the list. And the artillery batteries are Stewart's battery and in Alonzo Cushing. Two of them in the 4th U.S. that lose the most number for artillery in the Battle of Gettysburg. So the infantry regiments are a little lower, but they're not. It's not inconsequential. And you just mentioned what those numbers are. 57%. Remember, the 20th Maine loses what? 32%.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking 57%.
And they
That's a
and they make
huge
a movie
number.
and they make a movie out of those guys,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so the one thing too I wanted to make sure we covered, I'm sure you would have mentioned it anyways, but during the retreat back across the Valley of Death, who is
Mm-hmm.
giving them good covering fire? Is a son of Ohio? I thought we might want to put a little bit of a plug in there.
Yeah, Frank Gibbs battery is covering that because they're on the slope of Little Round Top. And the best way to see this for the viewers is to go where the 121st New York is, go to where the parking is on the north side of Little Round Top, and you can go down there and walk out. You can go out to where and see the view that these artillerymen would have had, and where the regulars started from and where they retreated to. So they're getting across that very swampy ground, and the Gibbs battery, they're ordering, trying to get the men to go to ground because they want to fire canister into that line of the Confederates. That shows you how close these Confederates are. I mean,
Yeah.
they're clear down in the Valley of the Death, way down there where Plum
Wow.
Run is.
As we were falling back, we saw the battery officers at the base of Round Top waving their hats for us to hurry up. We
Yeah.
realized that they wished to use canisters, so we took up the double quick. Now again, Valley of Death, folks. This is how a guy describes it as I was
Yeah.
crossing the swampy ground.
Yeah.
Swampy
Uh,
ground, folks. Captain of the 3rd U.S. was shot in the leg, fell against me, and knocked me down. When I got the mud out of my eyes, I saw the artillerymen waving their hats to lie low. I got behind a boulder with a number of my men when the battery opened with canister.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
quote I actually
Yeah.
used a lot on tours, and
Yeah.
I think it tells
And
you so much right there.
right, right. And so they're trying to cover. That's how close the enemy's right on top, right on top, right on top of where they're at. One of these men in the 11th U.S., and we'll talk about him a little later when you ask me about some stories. He says he's captured down there by Wofford's brigade and is down inside the Valley of the Death and doesn't get relief until the Pennsylvania Reserves come down there. So some of the guys that can't make it are temporarily captured by the Confederates who are down, who are down inside there. I mean, that's very, very close action. A lot of close action down there.
Wayne, perhaps the most famous quote of all associated with the U.S. regulars. For 2 years, the U.S. regulars taught us to be soldiers. In the Wheatfield at Gettysburg, they taught us to die like soldiers.
Right, right.
Thoughts or comments on that? I guess that comes from a guy actually up on Little Round Top in Weeds Brigade, I think, kind of
Yeah, I
watching
think
the,
it's in the 155th
yeah,
Pennsylvania. General Ayres was asked after what happened to the regulars, and he said I had regulars. I lost half of them at Gettysburg, and I buried the rest of them at the Wilderness,
right.
which
Oh,
is
wow.
basically what he says. They're virtually wiped out. But these units were model in many respects model units for the volunteers to watch and to understand when it came to discipline, when it came to drill, when it came to leadership, all important things for successful combat units. And these regular units, they had esprit de corps. They were very proud. And as I said earlier in the video, that you just these units, you can look up many of these Gettysburg units, and you're going to find some of them still on active duty today. They have a long and proud history of fighting for our country.
Getting late in the evening, the regulars have fallen back to Little Round Top. One guy says we were bloodied, we were bruised, but they get back to Little Round Top. Gibbs has covered the retreat. You've got again Wofford, elements of Kershaw, Semmes, probably just a whole
Mm-hmm.
mix of Confederates kind of coming out of the wheat field, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania Reserves, of course, will lead the
Yeah, they're
counterattack.
gonna they're gonna charge down that same ground basically that the regulars charged and push back those Confederate elements for the last and final phase. So the
Right.
regulars are in close to the end phase of the Wheatfield fighting for people that are following all the different phases. And you're going to have to stay tuned for the Wheatfield on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast, the numbers to get all the different
Part seven,
phases
folks. Yeah, that's
that
right.
you,
Part
that you
seven.
know that you want. But if you follow that, you can pretty. It's difficult to understand. But the regulars are in toward the end, and
Right.
then the Pennsylvania reserves come in and clear that out, and then they spend the night down there. And boy, I tell you, that is interesting because in the evening at night, even though they risk being captured, some of those regular officers and men, they go out looking for their friends. They go out finding bodies, trying to get wounded men, trying to retrieve them, and bring them off the battlefield in the middle of the night out there, risking possibly being captured. And then on July 4, the regulars are sent to skirmish against the Confederates. Of course, the Confederates pull back, but I have accounts of regulars actually in the Sherfy house, actually
Hmm.
inside the Sherfy house,
Hmm.
on a skirmish line. So Captain Horace Thatcher of the 14th U.S., a number of officers, they took men out and went out heading west along the plain following, where the Wheatfield Road is, out there to the Emmitsburg Road. So there are regular skirmishers skirmishing on the 4th. And one of the officers in the 3rd U.S., I think it's the 3rd, loses his arm out there in the skirmish fighting.
Hmm.
So there's additional casualties even after. We think just July 2nd, there's
Right.
additional
Right.
casualties for the regulars. These same regiments that fought in the Wheatfield basically on July 4th.
Make sure you check out our friends at the Research Arsenal, proud supporters of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast.
Wayne, any other thoughts, stories related to U.S. regulars? Not necessarily July 2nd, but at least stay in Burbank skies that we want to cover before we start to wind things down?
Yeah, I just want to say that there are several of these men. The longevity of the service of some of these men, including the officers, is tremendous. I want to give you two examples. Emerson Lixom is his name, Lic, Lixom. He was an officer in the 12th United States Infantry Regiment. He's in the Battle of Gettysburg in the 12th. He's basically second lieutenant, and he is killed in the Boxer Rebellion as the colonel of the Ninth Infantry, shot and killed in 1900 fighting, and he was an officer in the Wheatfield. Another one is another man by the name of Harry Egbert, and Egbert was also in the 12th United States Infantry Regiment in the Battle of Gettysburg. He also was a lieutenant, and he was killed in the Philippines in action in 1899.
Wow.
Both of these men, young officers, in the Battle of Gettysburg, both of them in service, 1899, 1900. Just think
Wow.
about. So some of these men go on to have very, very long careers. You just mentioned you read a great quote from Page. Page was an officer in the Third U.S. and he'll retire a brigadier general. So
Wow.
I mean, these men, some of them go on to have long rank and long service in the war. In the 14th U.S., John J. Coppinger. Coppinger was a member of the Papal Guard. He was a Papal Guardsman and died in 1909. He's a veteran of the Spanish-American War, and he married the daughter of Secretary of State Blaine, who was with James Garfield when Garfield was
Yeah,
assassinated. I
right.
mean, Secretary of State
Mhm.
when Garfield.
Right.
So John J. Coppinger in the Battle of Gettysburg was his son-in-law, you know, the daughter of that man. So it's
Hey,
just interesting
that
these
that
history.
reminds me, speaking of marriage and connections, don't we have a marital connection to George Green here somewhere that we didn't mention?
Yeah. So George Green's daughter married the son of Hannibal Day, who was a naval officer.
Oh.
And so Hannibal Day and George Green are related by marriage. And this kind of makes sense because they had known each other since their
Hmm.
West Point
Right.
days. Had really known each other. So, and they both die in Morristown, New Jersey. I think at one time they were in the same house together. The couple
That's
built
right. I think
a
they
house
are.
for them together. And Jim, I think they were both in the same house at one time together.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's right. Kind of in the retirement years for the two generals, they
Yes.
kind of pool their resources.
Yes.
Now,
Jody, you said, oh, don't you remember
oh,
me talking about all this at Seminary Ridge Museum last year when I did
Oh,
my green
she
bio?
brought all
yes.
that.
That's how I remembered
Actually,
that.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
But I
right.
wanted to ask or point out, so the 14th, they go up to the draft riots just a few weeks later, right?
Yes, and I think part of the 11th U.S. maybe there
Yeah.
several of these regiments, and that's another thing. These regiments, several of them were sent up to New York City to quell the draft riots, and one of the reasons why is the government officials aren't sure they want to trust some volunteers. Now there are some volunteer units there, but
Hmm.
they want to have some regular units
And
that
I
are
was wondering, is it because they want regular units? Is it because they're so shot up and they're in the middle of kind of reorganizing them, so they just sent them to New York, because they'd have to reorganize after the Battle of Gettysburg,
Well, they
somewhat.
do, but of course they wouldn't be the only units that are shot up. A lot
Right.
of the volunteer units are shot up too. But
Right.
I think it has a lot to do with those units being part of the regular, part of the
Hmm.
regular establishment. I think they wanted to make sure that they had some of that discipline up there. But you're right; some of these units are sent to quell the New York City draft riots in the summer of 1863. And how would that be mentally on the men that just fought the Confederate Army in the Wheatfield? Next thing you know, they're shipping everybody up to New York to try to quell riots. I can't imagine what's
No.
going through the head of some of those soldiers
Yeah.
that are there. But the stories are simply fascinating. There are so many of them. We don't have time to tell them all. But Jim, I'm grateful to you and Jody for having me on to talk a little bit about them because they're fascinating and hopefully we can shed some more light on them and hopefully your listeners and viewers will enjoy this informational
Yeah. Well,
work on them.
Do you want to talk about your U.S. regular project, or would you rather not? I
No,
mean, we
I
can.
can talk about it.
Okay.
I guess I don't I'm not sure what kind of competition I have, but maybe somebody will help me if they hear. I've been working on the regular officers for many years at Gettysburg. So I have 354 regular Army officers that I have that I've been trying to profile. These are officers in the regular Army that fought at Gettysburg that don't have volunteer commissions. And I'd like to do a little study on them with a lot of data about them and little biographical sketches. So over the years, I've been collecting, and I've got a lot of friends that have been, that have also helped me on the way get material. The regulars don't have compiled service records. They're not like the volunteers. So they're more difficult to research, and certainly getting the manuscript material, as we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, is a little bit more difficult because they're not recruited basically in the same place for all that. So I've been plugging away, collecting sources on it, and hopefully someday
Yeah.
I can get that together. I've sure enjoyed working on it, and the stories are just endless as to what
I
about
can
these men.
I can attest to the fact you've been plugging away on that for a long time. I'll attest to that.
Yeah, you have you
You
know
and I
that.
both had less gray hair when you started that. Of course, Jody has
Yeah,
no
I
gray, so it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I
But
said
yeah,
it
yeah.
before. If I would have been you, this project would already been done. That's why I told everybody I love working with you on Pickett's Charge because you get the stuff done. I tend to tinker too much with it, but I'm not quite there with all the stuff I've got to assemble yet. Because it's still a little different, but I've got a lot of thoughts in my head about how to put it together. But I tell you, I'm hoping I can get something out that will fill a real void on this because on a topic that just isn't covered. Unfortunately, I've got not to dwell on it, but I've probably got of these officers. I think I have 13 suicides in that
Yeah.
group. I've got um, drug and alcohol. I have some slaveholders that are in there. Page that you just mentioned was one of them. His father was a Mexican War veteran, died in the Mexican War, Jim. Page's father that you read and was a slaveholder, and Page, I think, owned one slave. Even these Union officers at Gettysburg, some of them were slaveholders, not many. Union regular Army officers and their families come from slaves. So there's just interesting dynamics. Some of them come from the border states. Some of them are professional soldiers. They come from all kinds of different things, and they have family members on the other side in some cases.
Mhm.
So it's just fascinating to know about all that. So I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me to comment on that.
Last but not least, what kind of exciting stuff is going on at the National Civil War Museum right now?
Oh, I'm really happy to be there. We're starting to do our monthly lecture series. I'm going to bring that back. Lecture's the wrong word. Presentation series. We're going to do monthly in-person talks at the Civil War Museum, as I did when I was there the first time. We'll be doing that. We're going to do some special events, book kickoffs. One of the first things I did was I had you, and I was really great that you came and you gave a wonderful talk, and we had book signing for you on your first day book. It was wonderful. I'm going to do some more of that. And then I'm doing the video series for the National Civil War Museum. So hopefully people will tune in to the National Civil War Museum's YouTube channel and the Civil War Museum's Facebook channel. And I'm doing 4 series for that. And one of them is on Return to the Battlefield, where I'm bringing artifacts back. And one of the artifacts I'm going to post shortly. It'll be out by the time this video is out. Is on Thomas O'Barry, who was an officer in the 11th U.S. And the National Civil War Museum has a book, a regulation book that he owned that belonged to him during the war. He was killed at Gettysburg, and he's the highest ranking regular buried in the National Cemetery as a regular soldier in the
Oh,
National Cemetery. So hopefully people will tune in on some of these video series too as well, Jim. I
Yeah, I hope
appreciate
so.
that. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Jody, any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank Wayne for helping us get closer to ending our Wheatfield saga.
Yes, yes.
It feels like
I
we're
liked all
almost
your
there.
nobody complained that you had too many, did they? I like all the
Oh,
episodes
not
you've
at
had.
all. No,
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure you're going to have many people that'll want you to do that. It's such a complicated place. So these podcast episodes, these episodes you're doing on YouTube, they can try to unsort this, sort it out or
Mhm.
sort it out. It's so difficult to get it into any kind of compartmentalized thing you can think about it. So
And
I think
before
it's
you
great.
came on, we were talking, and I said I feel like so much when you're trying to learn or get out there, it's almost like you get to the U.S. regulars and they're like, oh, when the U.S. regulars come, and then
No,
they're pushed back, and the PA reserves sweep the field, and then that's it. Like I feel like there's this big lead up, and nobody dives into either one.
no, no.
So thank you
Well,
for
there is significant fighting there. It does not last that long, but it
right.
is pretty significant, and we've covered the highlights of it.
Hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
lot to know about it, but just getting those phases down. You go to
Hmm.
Antietam, the fight's going to be from the Confederate left to the Confederate right, from the Union right to the Union left, and you can kind of follow it. You get in there at the Wheatfield, it's really hard to sort that out. So, the Battle of Gettysburg podcast is sorting that out. That's a good thing
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
for for
All right.
everybody.
Wayne, you mentioned it earlier, but it's such a great quote from Ayers. I kind of had it here in closing.
Yeah,
Of course, again, because of the casualties and the attrition, they're ultimately combined into one.
yeah,
Eventually, the regular division no longer exists because they're barely above brigade strength. But Ayres was asked after the war if any of the regular troops he had commanded were still serving, and here's the quote: I had a division of regulars once. I buried half of them at Gettysburg and the other half in the wilderness. There's no regulars left. And I think that
yeah.
summarizes at least this phase of the fighting. Although, as you pointed out, many did go on to long careers and, frankly, in some cases, got killed elsewhere.
Some of them saw so much. Two of the men from the Second U.S. came to the dedication in 1909 of the regular monument. One of them was a sergeant that was at Gettysburg. He was at Westminster because he was assigned to the commissary and quartermaster wagons down there. But he had been in the Second U.S. and he joined the Second United States Infantry Regiment when he was 12 years old, 9 months. He was a musician at 12 years old, 9 months, and joined that in 1854. And he was already an 8-year veteran by the time he came to Gettysburg. And he's still alive when the regular monument is put up, and he doesn't die till after that. But he and his buddy are the only two left from his company that he talks about that had been in service. And the stuff that he saw against the Sioux at Fort Pierce, Fort Abercrombie, he had two hitches there. And then at Gettysburg, he's down at Westminster. Then he says he comes up to the battlefield, looks over Little Round Top, and he goes into the camp of the Second U.S. And half the people he knew aren't there anymore because they've
Mm.
been killed and had been killed or wounded. So a very emotional thing for these men that had long service with these units, Jim, and what you mentioned there, very poignant. And it weighed heavy on Ayres's mind, as
Yeah.
this quote shows.
Wayne Motts, Jody Wilson, U.S. regulars in the Wheatfield. Thank you both for taking some time out here. This has been another installment of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. What do we say, folks? Like, subscribe, watch. We're on YouTube. We're on YouTube. Also, follow us on Facebook. We've been having a lot of crazy shenanigans happening on our Facebook page, so you don't want to miss out on that too. And next time you ask us, when are you going to restart the wheat field? Here it is. We just did it. All right. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Good night. Take a few minutes and visit our website at the battleofgettysburgpodcast.com to shop, buy some new merch, check in on our upcoming events, and of course, buy Civil War books from one of your favorite podcasters.